Hello and welcome to another episode of Untold Chapters with AustinMacauley Publishers. In this episode, we are talking to Jemima Price, the author of Finding Ruby. Finding Ruby is a beautiful story about self-discovery and transformation. Ruby's story helps teach readers there is beauty in the unknown. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Untold Chapters. We're here with Jemima Price, the writer of Finding Ruby. Jemima, thank you for joining us today. Do you mind introducing yourself to our listeners?
Yes, hello. Thank you for having me on to Untold Chapters. I am a writer living in South Cambridgeshire. I'm actually Welsh, but I currently live in South Cambridgeshire. And yeah, I wrote Finding Ruby quite a while ago, and it was published in 2020. And it is based or inspired by some of my lengthy travels. I'm a bit of a traveller, so I wanted to kind of encapsulate that into a novel.
Beautiful. Yeah, I was going to say, because Ruby's character obviously is so adventurous and everything, I was going to ask if there was any kind of real life experiences from your life into her story, any specific storylines or just the traveling in general?
No, very much based upon my travels. I have travelled extensively, but when I was in my sort of mid to late 20s, quite a while ago now, longer than I like to admit, I went travelling. I went backpacking and expected to go away for about 9 months, and came back 4 years later. So it was quite a lengthy trip, and I sort of started, jotting down ideas. I did a lot of writing while I was travelling. I wrote a few travel articles, and I kept emails at the time, lengthy emails that I would send home, because we didn't have the social media that we have today. And I had the idea that I wanted to put some of my travels into a novel. And I used quite a lot of my emails and kind of correspondence home. And I kept a journal as well, a travel journal. And so, yeah, I poured quite a lot of my experiences into Ruby's journey. And yeah, it inspired in me. I was really keen to tell this particular story, but I mean, I could have picked any number of places or any number of stories, but this one kind of really spoke to me. So yeah, I went with this one for Ruby.
Amazing. Yeah, because in Finding Ruby, the key moment is obviously Southeast Asia tsunami that happened
Mhm.
20 years ago now. What was the reason for that specific event to be kind of the key point in this story?
I mean, really, because we had sort of not exactly first-hand experience of the tsunami, but we were in Southeast Asia when the tsunami hit. So we'd been traveling through China and Vietnam. It was my boyfriend, who's now my husband, and two friends. And we were in Vietnam at the time, and we'd been backpacking and sort of independent traveling. So trying to, stay in hostels and backpackers as much as we could to save money. And at Christmas time, we treated ourselves to a nice hotel. We were in Ho Chi Minh City, which is in South Vietnam. And I'd been quite adamant when we were traveling that we wouldn't give in and eat lots of Western food and get McDonald's and try and eat as much of the kind of local cuisine as we could. But this particular Christmas, because it was Christmas, we'd gone out and we'd had a Vietnamese hot pot, which was not a very satisfying Christmas dinner. So on Boxing Day, I gave in and I agreed we could go and get a KFC. And we took this KFC and we booked into a really nice hotel as a treat, which we very rarely did. And it had a TV in the room. And we hadn't watched TV for months. And we sat down with our bucket of KFC, and horrifically we turned it on, and every channel was just covering this awful event that had just happened, and it just kind of unfolded before our very eyes. And we started to see the numbers of people that had died racking up very quickly, and we just couldn't quite believe what we were seeing. And we didn't know how far reaching it was at that stage. It was on the other side of Southeast Asia from us, but we didn't know the impact at that point that it would have. And it was quite traumatic because at the time we were traveling, we didn't have mobile phones. I mean, we had kind of the little old Nokia bricks, but we
Mm.
didn't have the contact home that we would have today, which was really liberating, but at the same time scary for people at home. So all our families didn't know exactly where we were. They would just get a weekly update when we could find our way to an internet cafe. And so our friends and family at home were all kind of really worried and worried that we might be impacted by it. And so our first kind of action was to get to an internet cafe, let people know we were safe. And obviously people wanted us to come home, but we decided to keep traveling. And so I think we traveled on from there through Cambodia and Laos. And eventually we sort of met people on the way who said, yeah, Thailand is open and the routes are still open. And we reached Thailand. And it was only really then that we saw the massive impact that the tsunami had as we traveled down the west coast of Thailand. And yeah, it was just really shocking, and it was just devastating. And then I kind of we were meeting people along the way who had been there when the tsunami had hit, and there were just so many stories, and I just thought telling these stories was so important. And so I drew on a lot of things that people had told me at the time, people that I'd met. So some of the people that I've used some of their stories in the novel were local Thai people that owned hotels and restaurants and things along the coast, and they sort of talked to me about what it actually looked like. So I think when we think of this tsunami, it's very difficult to imagine unless you're in it. And so I took their ideas and I kind of wove them into the story. And then we actually met some travelers as well, some backpackers who had been in the tsunami and hit by the tsunami and had returned to kind of deal with the impact of that a few months on, or had lost people in a tsunami. And without giving away too much, there was a direct experience that happens to Ruby in the novel, and that happened to somebody that I met. So it had a really massive impact on us, and seeing the damage that something like that can do. I think that the biggest impact was when we sort of traveled through some of the towns along the coast. And I mean, the Thai people were so resilient, and they were building already, and they were getting their lives back on track. The first thing that we saw that was shocking was we were traveling by bus, and there was a huge boat inland, a couple of miles inland, sitting in a field that had been sort of dropped there. And we saw trees that had been uprooted and twisted. And then eventually we finally, the thing that really stuck in my head was we saw a bridge that had been twisted and torn apart, and it was made of concrete and steel. And seeing these steel girders just twisted and ripped apart, it was just breathtaking, because you just think, imagine being a person caught up in that. It was really quite shocking. So I knew that was something that I really wanted to include in the novel, and sort of describe what it might have been like to have gone through that.
It's amazing that you saw it firsthand. I mean, that must have been quite harrowing almost. And bringing that story to life, it must have been really rewarding. But was there any moments where, even though it was rewarding to write about and you felt like you needed to tell these stories, was there any moments that were particularly hard to kind of think back and realize the effect of the people whose story you were telling? Or was it more, no, I need to get this down for them?
It was a bit of both. And like I said, that I wanted to try and do it sensitively. And I think one of the most shocking stories that I've included in the novel was a gentleman that was there working and and it was months after the tsunami, and still trying to clear. It was Koh Phi Phi that was really badly hit, and still trying to clear the damage that was there. And there were still sadly dead bodies there, and at Koh Phi Phi, and him describing just how he'd lost someone very dear to him, but he was still there working to help the community get back on its feet. And I think just the numbers of people that we met along the way, it was really traumatic hearing those stories. But I was also inspired by many of the local Thai people who had gone through that, survived, and just got back on with their lives. They really just kind of were rebuilding, and that's what they have to do, because they don't have necessarily the same support we might have after a disaster in the United Kingdom or in Europe. So they were quite an inspiration as well.
I can only imagine how that must have been talking to those people. And you have approached this book in such a beautiful way. It's amazing to hear that some of those, I mean, amazing and obviously devastating to hear that some of those stories are from kind of real life people, but it does just bring the story even more to life for people. After the tsunami happens in the book, obviously Ruby goes through this big transformation. How did you approach that? Was it something that kind of you yourself had gone through a bit of a transformation, so you were like, oh, we'll kind of extend on this? Or was that kind of to keep the story going and to understand what the after effects of that would be?
I think that I get asked quite often if Ruby's based on me. The traveling's based on a lot of my experiences, or all my friends' experiences, but Ruby is very much not based on me. So at least at the start of the novel anyway. So I knew that in order to kind of describe this sort of profound transformation that she undergoes, I'd have to set up a character that was quite anathema to me from the start. So I had to have her as being, quite pathetic, really, like reliant on her boyfriend and allowing her boyfriend to treat her not very well, and probably, things that I would never tell a young woman to behave like if I had the choice. It's funny when I give the book to people, I kind of want to say to them, that Ruby's not me at the start, because I hope that I'd have a bit more backbone. I wanted to have her as sort of like this real kind of just sort of, she thinks she's happy and actually her life is really limited, and she's kind of really boxed herself in, and she doesn't really know her own potential. So I found it quite hard to set that up initially, because I thought, I'm not sure she's even very likable at the start, and she's kind of bullied almost into doing this journey with her boyfriend. So that was quite a challenge, really, to set that up, to make people still kind of invest in her, because she needed to be that way to then undergo this transformation. And there's a few sort of situations that she goes through that cause her to transform and have this sort of metamorphosis. So yeah, it was that initial characterization that I found more of a challenge. And then she becomes more like me towards the end, the way that she embraces travel. I'd always wanted to travel. I was very different to Ruby in that way, that I'd had this sort of desire to travel for a really long time. And when I managed to go away on my own independent journey, I absolutely adored my initial landing in. We went to Beijing as our first stop on our long trip, and that was such a culture shock. But I absolutely loved it. I loved how different it was, and I loved how difficult it was to travel. And I thought, when Ruby arrives in Bangkok, she's got to have a very different reaction. So I had to think, right, how would somebody react to this if they really didn't like this, if this really wasn't their type of thing. So that was quite fun to do. Whereas I absolutely love traveling in more difficult places, or more challenging places, or places that are kind of really in your face and chaotic, and I kind of embrace that. So it was quite fun to do that, but also a bit of a challenge. Hopefully I would like to think I'm more like Ruby towards the end of the novel than the start of the novel.
I like the fact that you feel like you need to go, I'm more her at the end. It's not based on me.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely. I didn't want people to think that I've been there and forced, because I think people that know me know that I've done a lot of traveling, but
yeah.
I've wanted to travel for as long as I can remember. So yeah, that was quite different for me.
Oh, I really like that though. I like that you've still brought in elements of your personal experiences into it. What message are you hoping that readers take away from Ruby's experience with the loss, the fear, and then the kind of self-empowerment elements of the story?
I mean, I work with young people. I'm a teacher of teenagers, and I like to kind of teach young people that they can do hard things, and that there is beauty in doing hard things. And there's beauty kind of putting yourself into difficult, challenging situations and succeeding, or at least learning from them. And I think that, maybe when I was Ruby's age, when I was younger, I probably wasn't as confident as I am now. And I think that when I did my own independent traveling, it really developed me as a person, developed my confidence and my independence. I'm a bit hypocritical in that I didn't travel alone like Ruby does, but I have done subsequent journeys and trips and things on my own. And I think just, it's kind of a reminding yourself that, yeah, sometimes things are difficult and you're out of your comfort zone, but there's so much you can get from that. And even this year, I've found myself, I've had a few really great opportunities this year to do some trips to places I've never been before, and one of them was to Morocco, and I found myself climbing the highest peak in North Africa, which is Mount Toubkal. It's 4,600 meters, and I thought, oh, I've climbed mountains before, but that was in my 20s, and now I'm in my 40s, and it's much harder. It's a bit of a different kettle of fish. And I did find myself going up this mountain at 3 a.m. to try and reach the peak. And I thought, what am I doing? What on earth am I doing at my age, trekking up this mountain? But I did it, and I felt so fantastic that I'd done it afterwards. And so many people said to me, gosh, I don't know, how you could manage that now. So yeah, I think it's still really important to put yourself out of your comfort zone, and that's the message I'd like to give to young people, and to people, older people as well, and that you don't have to stop having adventures. And I loved sort of the young people that I went to Morocco with. just seeing them experience a culture that they've never experienced before, in a country they've never been to before, and meeting people that live in a way that they've never experienced before. And it just sort of opened their eyes to the world. And I just like to tell people that there's a wider world out there beyond your comfort zone, beyond your village or your town or your country. And I just think everybody should try and explore and experience it as much as they can, because you just learn so many lessons. I mean, I've learned this year, I've never been to Morocco before, and I learned so much from the really wonderful people that we met there and the experiences that we had there. So I just like to keep learning, and I encourage everybody to do that as much as they can.
I love the fact that you're still adventuring. I think I definitely wish that I kind of adventure more, but I think there is a fear of going outside your comfort zone, but there also is so much beauty outside of your comfort zone. Um,
Absolutely, yeah. When we left, like I said, for our long journey when we were younger, we sort of sold our house, sold our car, sold everything. And that was really terrifying. And we got rid of our mobile phones. And that was really scary to just have what was on your back. And when we got on that plane, it felt like the most amazing feeling in the world, because you just suddenly, all of the weight of everyday life had sort of dropped away. And I'd say the same thing happened again this year. I was really stressed before we went to Morocco. It's the end of term and we were trying to wrap everything up. And I just thought, what am I doing going off on this trip now? And the minute I got away, I just was so glad I'd done it. I sort of pushed myself out of my comfort zone. So yeah, it's really, really empowering.
Amazing. Last question for you is, if you could describe Ruby's journey in 3 words, what would they be and why would you choose them?
I was trying to think about something that wouldn't be too trite to describe her journey, but I think the one that jumps out to me really is metamorphic, because she does undergo this profound change. And I think anyone that's done anything challenging or experienced difficult times and builds a new element of their personality or their character from that has that sense of metamorphosis. And that's what I think is so important about many of these experiences that we can give to ourselves. And I really enjoyed writing Ruby's metamorphosis. I really enjoyed writing her character as it, or building her character as she became stronger. So yeah, definitely a metamorphosis. I would also say challenging. Her journey is challenging. I mean, I'm not averse to beach holidays. They definitely have their place, and a nice relaxing beach holiday or a few days away. But I do think that those journeys that you can undertake where you do something more difficult and you have to experience real life in that country rather than just going to a beach resort or being sheltered away in a hotel. I think quite often doing those challenging things is where we really learn about the world and then about ourselves. And I think that Ruby's trip is character building and freeing as well. And yeah, that probably brings me to my last word. I'd probably say uplifting, because I wanted people to have the sense that we can be safe, we can be cozy, we can be happy in our kind of everyday world where we kind of do the same thing over and over again. But sometimes stepping outside of that is really exhilarating. I wanted readers to come away from it feeling uplifted and enthused about doing something different. It doesn't have to be a big long trip abroad. It could be trying taking up a new activity or hobby, or trying a new job, or whatever it is. That sometimes making a change can really give you that sense of exhilaration. And yeah, I wanted people to come away from it, even though it deals with this real tragedy, this really tragic event. I was hoping that people would come away from it feeling positive and uplifted and enthused.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today. Ruby's story is absolutely beautiful.
And thank
Um,
you for speaking with me.
Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Untold Chapters. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. If you are listening on Spotify, please follow and give us a 5-star review. There will be a link in the description to buy Jemima Price's book, Finding Ruby.